Welcome, you've got
Cat. Content warning. This video contains discussions of triggering and uncomfortable topics. Please feel free to skip chapters or click away at any point or reach out to a crisis center if you need help. Links below. I want to give a special shout out to these patrons. If you want more info, you can find it at the end of the video. Previously on Degrassi.
You didn't do anything.
So I didn't dress like a slut? I didn't drink? I didn't come on to him in front of the whole party?
Paige,
I guess I didn't ask him to go upstairs either.
you said no.
It doesn't matter.
We're going to talk more about his diagnosis and the portrayal of his symptoms as we get closer to that story, which was to be a cute nod to Kevin Smith's love of Degrassi in general and his love of Caitlin in particular. The two get into a fight. Lashing out in anger, Rick proceeds to physically assault Terry, but instead what I found was a cutscene of him kissing Liberty. Plus, we don't want that JT/Liberty story moving too quickly, do we? So, season 4. This has been a hard one to write, probably the hardest to write so far, specifically because of a lot of current events that have occurred while I was working on it, making it really difficult. I've had to take multiple breaks over the course of writing it just because it was hard on me, and I'm really sorry about that. Research was hard for other reasons too. I bought a version of the DVD that was supposed to have commentary on it, but I can't seem to access it for some reason, so there might be some really cool commentary that I don't know how to get into. Season 4 is kind of when the production of the show and the behind the scenes info went from being more informative to, well, more to PR. This is a subtler shift, and it's not entirely a bad thing, but interviews and clips from here on kind of take on a promotional tone rather than the more documentarian one that we had seen before. It's also worth noting that this was the beginning of online fandom as we know it today. It was still in its infancy, living mostly on live journals, forums, and official sites rather than posting fan cams and hashtags on social media. But still, the preoccupation that modern fandom has with shipping wars, trending pages, and meta over analysis can be found if one looks closely, which I did. A chunk of the research I did for this and future seasons involved reading through a few still extant forums from that time. These were an invaluable resource as some of these posts related to things that were happening on the now defunct Degrassi.tv website, especially the within-character blogs known as the journals. The posts also provided great insight into the minds of members of the fandom as season 4 played out, which in itself was fascinating for me to see because of all the weird disjointedness of the fandom itself. I've mentioned before that the Degrassi fandom had what you might call a piracy issue. Well, at the time I brought it up in the context of episodes that were edited or even banned in different countries, the infamous Manny abortion episode, for example, being the first thing that some of these teens ever pirated. It's worth mentioning that all Degrassi episodes released on CTV a few months before the in air date. Of course, as with modern anime fandom waiting for their faves to get official Western releases, the temptation to pirate the already aired episodes is palpable. This meant that speculation for the show was in an especially weird state, as half the fandom had already seen the episodes through both legitimate and illicit means. The INS forums, I distinctly remember, banned any discussion of unaired Canadian episodes of the show, and because of this, the American fandom that dwelled there remained mostly unspoiled, though I do remember the occasional spoiler would get through. Because Canadian viewers confirming that these leaks were legit could get them into trouble, they just didn't, and misinformation was rampant. I remember learning about supposed character deaths from a spoiler thread that ultimately never came to pass, thank goodness. But unofficial forums didn't have this issue, as Canadians who had seen the CTV broadcasts could easily dispel any rumors. This did mean, however, that members of these communities often had entire synopses and character plot lines revealed even before the inn started promoting the episodes in question. I don't really have an opinion as to whether this is good or bad. It simply was part of the fandom as it existed at that time. I can only compare it to fandoms of today that have region-locked shows like anime or something like, at the moment, Our Flag Means Death, which some international viewers do not have a legitimate way to watch yet. This would be a good spot for a VPN segment, by the way, if anyone wanted to sponsor me. However, download speeds and bandwidth are much better today than they were in 2005, so even that comparison might not be entirely accurate. Piracy simply just was not an option for some people. Heck, some of these forum threads have explicit warnings at the top that they will be posting pictures in these threads for those with slower internet connections. If you can't even browse a gallery of photos, you certainly cannot download a 30-minute TV show. As I'm sure you can imagine, based on my enthusiasm here, these forums were really interesting to dig dig through. On the ones that I found, the aftermath of season 3 was much what I would have expected. Shipping wars broke out in various parts of the fandom, most often amongst the Manny and Craig, or Ashley and Craig shippers, who, by the way, I did not learn until this research, called their ship, at least on one forum, Crash, which I love and am obsessed with. It's not often that a compound ship name like that also embodies the feeling of watching the ship in real time. These fans would invade each other's boards, posting long anti-lists about why Craig and Ashley are toxic, or why Manny shouldn't be in a relationship with anyone because she's a slutty McSlutface. Okay, so the level of discourse was not always the highest. You hear about misogyny and racism in fandom now, but like going back and looking at the way that it was in 2005, 2006, yikes, guys. The shipping wars got so bad that one of the forums I visited had to institute a rule banning this sort of behavior. Stick to your own threads, shippers. If you can't be nice, just stay in your own home. What I found the most interesting, though, was that none of the fandom was able to predict where the show would go. They were pretty good at guessing which characters would get screen time, though some, like Rick, blindsided them a bit. But they had no idea which issues Degrassi would choose to touch on moving forward, or how much continuity the show would bring with it into the future. And honestly, I can't blame them. It's really interesting comparing that to the more modern Degrassi fandom, which I think was pretty good at predicting what kinds of things were going to happen in the show. But at this point, the show was still new, and it was also changing quite a bit. Degrassi was shifting into a more continuous story, and as much as the fans wanted that, I don't think they could have predicted exactly how it was going to play out. Paige. Season 4 starts with Paige helping her boyfriend Spinner christen his new car. He's worked all summer and is now being rewarded with a hot set of wheels that he and his friends can take full advantage of. However, before they get to live out their dreams of drive-ins and makeouts, a man approaches their car and serves Paige a subpoena. Did she press rape charges over a year ago? Yes? Well, the legal system may be slow, but it has been plodding along this whole time, and now it's time for Paige to see Dean in court. Here, in the first 5 minutes of the new season, Degrassi does a couple of surprising things. One, it takes a scene that seemed to be pure shipping bait, Spinner and Paige planning their evening and future high school plans now that the open road is open to them, and turns it into an issue episode. And two, it brings up a plot line that we literally haven't seen for an entire season. Degrassi is saying two things with this opening scene. One, regardless of how the last season seemed, we are not just a shipping show. And two, you'd better remember old plot lines because continuity is about to become important. A quick reminder about Dean for those who haven't seen the last video in a while, or ever. Dean was a senior that took Paige up to a room during a house party and raped her. Eventually, toward the end of that season, Paige decided to take him to court. Viewers would, I think, be forgiven for thinking that perhaps this plot thread had ended when season 2 did. After all, we never saw Emma go to court, even though the officer who arrested her creep said that her case would be pivotal in putting him behind bars. Later, Terry's dad surely would have wanted to press charges on Rick, and may have been within his rights to do so, but this is a point left entirely out of that saga. Degrassi doesn't do courtroom drama, at least not until this point. This actually makes sense to me. Degrassi has always been less interested in external drama than internal. This is why in Degrassi High, the real issue when Caitlin had to go to court for trespassing and vandalism was not the court case itself, which might serve for some interesting plot lines on another show, but about the way Claude's abandonment made her feel and how it affected her relationship with him. Which is exactly what Degrassi is doing again with this storyline. While obviously viewers want Dean to get what he deserves and be held accountable, the story the writers want to give us is actually one about how the court system treats victims and the detrimental effects of reliving your trauma even long after you thought you'd healed. And so that's what this two-parter is about. The actual courtroom scenes are short, taking a back seat to Paige's emotional response to the situation. Throughout the show, it's hinted that though they have been dating for quite a while, Paige and Spinner's physical relationship has maybe stalled somewhere along the way.
Okay, well, I don't know what to do.
It's okay, Craig. Looks like somebody here hasn't made it past third base himself.
And in these early episodes of season 4, it is implied that Paige keeps Spin at a distance because of the abuse she suffered, more than because of a lack of interest. Now, though, it is starting to directly impact their relationship. Paige, in a desperate attempt to put things back to where they were at the beginning of the season, suggests that she might not even go to court. This sets Spinner off, and he, albeit temporarily, dumps her. To Paige, letting go of the trial would be a relief, a break from constantly thinking about the trauma and the fear of confronting it in the courtroom. But to Spinner, Paige dropping the charges means that she'll never be free of Dean, always haunted by what happened to her and unable to move forward with him. In the end, ultimately, Spinner does see things her way, but Paige does also manage to find the strength to move forward with the trial anyway. The trial itself is hard to watch, especially now. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I live in Canada, so I'm going to avoid commenting on the accuracy of the court's portrayal here, but I am going to give my opinion. I always found it odd that the prosecutor, also known as the Crown Counsel in Canada, did not seem to prep Paige at all for the kinds of questions she would be getting, but in the end, I'm not sure it matters. No amount of discussion can really prepare someone for the experience of being forced to defend the validity and the truth of the trauma that they've endured. I mean, like, truly, this is a horrific thing for a teenage girl to have to go through, but no doubt that Dean and those around him who believe that he did nothing wrong find this line of questioning justified. After all, in their minds, she is incorrect. Mistaken about what happened, maybe confused and regretful, or at worst, outright lying in order to hurt Dean. To them, there is no trauma to relive, and so what they are doing to her is acceptable. Of course, as viewers, we know the truth. Paige's testimony is compelling. Her counsel objects to a question about her sexual history. Here in the States, that kind of question would be thrown out as previous sexual history is not relevant to an accusation of rape. Paige, however, chooses to answer it, telling the court that she was a virgin. This is supposed to add to her credibility, I believe. After all, in her own words,
And I certainly would not have chosen to lose my virginity upstairs at a house party with a guy I'd known for an hour.
Unfortunately, I do think that this has the unintended side effect of implying that had Paige not been a virgin, her testimony would not have struck the judge as so credible, which is why, as I mentioned, these kinds of questions are just generally not allowed. As much as we don't like to admit it, victims' behavior prior to their abuse is often used to shield or attack them. Less likable or imperfect accusers who use drugs or alcohol, or who even have a history of prior abuse in relationships, are often deemed as less reliable. Sometimes their status as victim is even called into question, tainted by their actions. Like, sure, maybe they were abused or assaulted, but, In some ways, this is part of the point that Degrassi is making in these episodes. Remember in season 2 how Paige believed that she could not be a victim of rape because she voluntarily pursued Dean and dressed, in her words, like a slut? This is reinforced by the verdict. And ultimately, though the judge seems sympathetic to Paige, she decides that she cannot rule against Dean with the current evidence, and he is free to go. This is unfortunately quite common. The obstacles to perpetrators like Dean finding justice are many. Victims who don't report, prosecutors who don't charge. Even among those who make it to trial, the conviction rate is below average, often due to the circumstantial nature of the evidence. Paige is understandably devastated. She reacts by acting out at a college party while visiting her brother Dylan, claiming that since it's been proven that she's a slut in court, she might as well act like one. Then, pissed and looking for a way to regain control, she steals her boyfriend's car and smashes it into Dean's. It's badass, and I love it. Is it the right thing to do? Is it appropriate? Absolutely not. I still love it. Spinner is actually going to take the heat for what she did, taking credit for smashing his own car into Dean's, but Paige does come clean, turning herself into the station and taking responsibility. Of course, this is in contrast to Dean's behavior, but aside from the morality of her choice there, it's just kind of a great cathartic moment when she reveals the truth to him.
You're gonna go down for that? Prove it was you.
Sorry to take away your fun, but I'm about to confess. That's what good people do when they realize they've done something wrong.
This sets up the rest of the season in a lot of ways. Paige now owes both Dean and Spinner for wrecking their cars, and she has to find a job, which she does eventually, though not before being fired from the Dot for being a terrible waitress. Paige eventually finds a job working at a movie theater concession stand with Alex, Jay's girlfriend, who finds herself in a much bigger role this season. The other thing that gets set up early in this season is the rivalry between Manny and Paige. Manny, Spinner, and Paige. So something happened in the 2-episode premiere that changed the balance of power between Spinner and Paige. Before now, Paige was always the one in control. This is demonstrated in season 3, for example, where there's this great subplot where Spinner is trying to get Paige the perfect 4-month anniversary gift. What he decides on is a locker in a prime location. Throughout the course of this subplot, Spinner is called whipped for working so hard to get Paige the perfect thing for their anniversary. This embarrasses both of them until the end when, though his plan ultimately fails, Spinner and Paige both kind of own the idea that this is just how their relationship is. Paige is high maintenance and Spinner is happy to try and satisfy it. But now, since Spinner dumped Paige, albeit briefly, and Paige feels guilt about owing him money and destroying his brand new car, the power has shifted. And unfortunately, that starts to cause problems. Eventually, as the relationship between the two of them is slowly breaking down on screen, Manny Santos enters the picture. So I did a lot of defending of Manny in the last video, and I stand by all of that. However, I'm less happy with how her story is handled here. She and JT, who dated all summer after going to the dance together at the end of last season, break up pretty quickly after JT shows how immature he is. He does a number of things, but the main one is he buys a penis pump because he saw Craig's in the locker room, which...
Down, and it's... I mean, around. Sometimes you hang around, and it's just not...
What are you looking at? You were checking out my...
No, I wasn't. That's not...
What?
Oh my god, I love it. Everything about that is perfect. After the breakup, Manny then turns around and starts flirting with Spinner. She is chosen to run the fundraiser car wash because Paige is for some reason unavailable to do it. This is the first, but certainly not the last time that Manny will be chosen to step up and lead the squad when Paige doesn't. She reaches out to Spinner to ask for his band to play in the car wash, since asking Craig would be awkward, and their relationship grows from there. I don't think I would hate this as much if we were given anything about her motivations here, like just a single scene with Emma or someone where she's like, yeah, I know he has a girlfriend, but he'd never do anything to hurt Paige, so it's harmless. Or I don't even care that he has a girlfriend, I really like him. Or just like anything. I just want to know what she's thinking. The Manny we saw in season 3 would have no qualms flirting with a boy who was taken if she thought she could make it work, as is explicitly stated when she tells Emma to go for it with Chris, even though she knows he has a girlfriend. The issue for me is that I understood her dating JT as being a sign of growth, and now it's ambiguous if she never grew or if she's backsliding. Or worse, if it's just the easiest way to make drama on the show because now we have a character who is known for this kind of behavior, Manny Santos as a sort of writing shortcut. Just as an aside, you may have noticed that I kind of try and take a mix of both Watsonian and Doyleist analysis when making these videos, although I tend to lean further into Watsonian because I tend to think that that is more fun for analysis, and often I don't like accusing the writers of bad writing just because I think it flattens the kinds of things that you can get out of the show. So I really don't want to accuse the writers of stuff like this. However, it has to be pointed out because this is the kind of thing that does become more common as the show goes on. It's hard not to think that this is something that starts happening in the writer's room. However, I don't know that I could call it bad writing if what they are trying to do is cause drama, because it does successfully make drama. Spinner becomes somewhat possessive of the flirtationship he's developing with Manny, pushing back when Craig warns him out of participating in it. Side note, there's a moment where Craig kind of sees what's happening between Spinner and Manny, and this little shrug that he gives here, like, not my problem. That doesn't last for long, though. Craig's motivations here are somewhat ambiguous, but they are at least purposefully so. He and Ash seem to be heating up again, but she kind of side-eyes him during all of this, making it clear that she suspects he's motivated by more than just protecting his friend and bandmate. The Manny-Craig shippers on the forums I found also interpreted his actions this way, and they were practically cheering when Spinner and Craig get into a fight at the mall over Manny. This fight, plus Spinner's cold and somewhat dickish behavior, is the last straw for Paige. She was fired from her movie theater job because her boyfriend was fighting over a girl who wasn't even her. She's done. Luckily, Alex helps her get her job back, and the two start their slow road to friendship. Turns out, Alex always had a sort of begrudging respect for Paige. Ultimately, it won't be the end of Paige versus Manny, but that storyline is put on the back burner for now, while we focus on Rick. Content warning. This section contains discussions of firearms, school shootings, and bullying. Okay, I don't know where to start. Originally, I had a bunch of research about school shootings, some data, stories about shootings that happened in Canada that weren't as widely known, how all of that lines up with how shootings are talked about in news or portrayed in fiction, stuff like that. But I don't think any of us need that. We all know by now what a school shooting is. Just as a note, I researched and wrote this section while my country was still mourning the tragic loss of life in Uvalde, Texas. And while all of the information of the failures of the system was coming out about that. And I feel less than equipped than ever to handle this topic. If this section feels a little more somber than usual, then that might be why. This storyline was written in a different time. That's not to say that the 2000s were free of fear from the gun violence. The fact that this story exists proves that they weren't. I went to middle and high school in a post-Columbine world, the same age as these characters actually, and I remember the drills and lockdowns. I remember the rush of fear that would shoot through me when a voice came over the loudspeaker and the teachers were told to lock the doors and we huddled in the corner away from the windows. But I also know that what I experienced and what the current generation is experiencing are not the same. Still, I think these episodes are kind of timeless. Degrassi, for its part, doesn't seem particularly interested in solving the problem of school shootings. Is the shooter mentally ill, or is he a victim of bullying? Would more peer support have stopped this? More help from teachers? Family? Would he have been stopped if he did not have access to a gun? Or was he just irrevocably broken, destined to do all of this from the start, all of the signs of violence missed? Degrassi doesn't even attempt to answer that. There are about as many theories as there are characters to voice them. As for me, I'm approaching this storyline as a viewer. Degrassi's stated goal during this time was to reach teenagers where they stand on their own terms, and I'll be judging its success by that standard, as someone who was a teen at the time. But, okay, let's back up, because when Rick shows up again, it doesn't start out as a story about gun violence. Last season, Rick physically abused his girlfriend Terry multiple times, culminating in a violent scene that caused Terry to sustain massive brain damage. Though Terry did recover, she never returned to the show, the ramifications of Rick's actions happening largely off-screen. Rick was expelled or removed from the school, and Terry moved on to private school. Neither character was really brought up again for the rest of the season in any real way, minus this one little scene in an episode late in the season that is primarily focused on Ashley, honestly. Season 4 is the season of continuity though, and so early on, it reintroduces Rick. The students are shocked and disgusted to find that Rick Murray is returning to Degrassi. Terry's old friends are, understandably, angry that he's back. That's an understatement. So are a few people who knew Terry but not very well, like JT and Emma, though Emma is also interested in this from an activist perspective. And then there are characters like Alex and Jay, whom we've never seen interact with Terry or Rick, and really only seem to be interested in this as far as it gives them an acceptable target for their bullying. And that's what happens. Emma and Alex make these little anti-intimate partner violence ribbons, a fundraiser for a domestic violence charity that doubles as a signifier of Rick's out-group status. Everyone who wears this is saying that they're specifically against not just domestic violence, but Rick himself and his presence at the school, and pretty much everyone wears one. Now, Rick might just be reaping what he sowed, experiencing the consequences of his own actions. Being ostracized is one of the means of social control that humans have been using mostly to our benefit for millions of years after all. But very quickly, the righteous judgment of the students borders on harassment. People begin to get physical with him, and at one point attempt to physically assault him. I understand that some might say that he deserves it for how he treated Terry, an eye for an eye, or if he can't take it, he shouldn't have dished it out. But honestly, I don't actually think that the answer to intimate partner violence is by deciding that abusers are an acceptable target for more abuse. Towards the end of the episode, Emma ends up standing up for Rick in a scene that is about to get violent. Though the ribbon campaign was her idea in the first place, she begins to question the mob mentality of the school when Rick offers his entire savings to the cause. Emma is tempted to take his money, thinking of how it could benefit their charity. Alex, however, refuses his money and the two girls clash. Alex says they're not going to give Rick redemption just because he has cash. And Emma believes that that money could be used for greater good than the harm that would be caused by assuaging Rick's own guilt. Alex disagrees, and for the first time, we hear her real motivations for jumping into this fight. She has witnessed domestic violence firsthand, and unimpressed with how the system and charities like Emma's have attempted to resolve the problem, has decided that this is how she can enact some justice. Alex is really interesting. I like that at first it seems that she's just kind of the same as Jay, happy to jump on the new social pariah. Looking closer, she's genuinely concerned about victims of intimate partner violence, which deepens her character. In a deleted scene, she and her co-president Marco both push to have Rick removed from Degrassi, and Alex says that he's a danger to the girls at the school. While I disagree with her final conclusion, he is dangerous, but I think that Rick would be more danger at another school where no one knows his history. It shows that she does genuinely care more about preventing more violence than just harassing the guy. The show's eventual stance does seem to favor Emma's viewpoint, but there's really nothing in the text that prevents the viewer from siding with Alex either, which I appreciate. I mean, I really get Alex's perspective. If some rich guy was accused of abusing his wife and then just donated millions of dollars to an abuse charity to kind of save face, I would be pretty irritated about that too. But though in that episode Emma sort of acts as Rick's savior, she is not his fan. Rick doesn't seem to understand this though. Maybe somewhat understandably, given his total isolation from the rest of the school. He sees her allyship as something more akin to friendship. He explains to her why he returned to Degrassi instead of starting somewhere new.
I like it at Degrassi. Well, I used to. That was horrible. I've changed. All those people who hate me, I want to let them see who I really am. Show them how wrong they are.
And believes her to be somewhat sympathetic to him. For what it's worth, I think she kind of is, though she often bumps up against her disgust for him as well. This ambivalence toward him is really interesting. After his return, Rick shows up in the background and B-plots of episodes. The show doesn't seem to want the viewers to forget that he's there. For example, in the car wash episode, he shows up to have his mom's vehicle washed, which the volunteers refuse to do, saying that his money is no good here. Then there's the B-plot with Toby, where the two of them bond over their shared love of role-playing games and girls. This is easily one of my least favorite stories in all of Degrassi. Alright, so in this one, the two nerds decide to wager over which of them can get the most kisses from the girls of Degrassi, and everything about it is awful. The only good thing about it is that it's a good character moment for Darcy Edwards, a new character who is also new to Degrassi and is unaware of Rick's reputation, and so she gives him a quick peck. I love Darcy, and this is a cute way to show off her character early on. Oh, she also kisses him because she got paid to by Toby. Also, there is one more redeeming factor about this subplot that I really like, which is this scene here where Rick gets shoved into a locker and Toby just kind of casually helps him up. It really demonstrates their friendship and what a haven Toby probably is for Rick in what is otherwise a very hellish school environment. So that's really subtle and I like it. I really shouldn't have to explain why an episode about tricking and manipulating girls into kissing you so that you can win a bet is gross and kind of misogynistic. Part of me wonders if this was kind of the point. Maybe I'm giving the writers too much credit here, but I think that this might have been meant to signal where Rick's storyline was going. After all, given that Emma, one of the moral centers of the show, seems to have turned more sympathetic toward Rick, I think it would be natural for viewers to think that Rick was on his way to a redemption arc. The forums that I was reading certainly thought so. They were losing their minds about these episodes. How do the writers expect us to forgive Rick when he does stuff like this? They asked, referring to the kissing competition. They seemed convinced that his return signaled a turn in his character, but this might have been just the effect the writers wanted. After all, the story was complicated. Some characters felt sorry for him, but his position as an outcast and victim of bullying didn't make him a saint. In fact, as we see, he appeared to have learned little about how to treat women in between the two seasons. Perhaps this was a deliberate choice by the writers. Or it was the early 2000s and the way we viewed boundaries about stuff like this was different. Both could be true, I guess. I should mention that Toby's friendship with Rick comes about around the same time that his friendship with JT is, flagging. JT is spending a lot of time with Liberty's brother Danny and also a lot of time with the senior kids. And Toby, who doesn't really fit in with either of those groups, opts to spend time with Rick instead. Perhaps he sees something of himself in Rick, a nerdy kid who could easily have become an outcast with no friends if he and JT hadn't hit it off in season 1. So Rick is kind of gathering a little friend group, or at the very least, if not friends, then he has people in his corner. They're all on this school quiz bowl team together. Rick, Emma, and Toby spend time together after school practicing their trivia skills for the Whack Your Brain competition. The only one left is Jimmy. Jimmy joins the group pretty late. In fact, at the start of Time Stands Still, the infamous two-parter, he's still actively engaging in bullying Rick. He and Spinner tossing Rick into a dumpster like it's an episode of Glee. He changes his tone pretty quickly, though. Rick strikes back. Feeling powerless to do anything, he spray paints Spinner and Jay's cars as an act of revenge. Jay, Spinner, and Alex all resolve to do something about it. Spinner, at this point, is somewhat estranged from his friend group. It's never explicitly stated, but I imagine that due to his breakup with Paige and subsequent hooking up with Manny, most of his friends are scarce. After all, most of them are friends with Paige, and even those who aren't have sort of an awkward relationship with Manny, like Craig. This social isolation and their shared hatred of Rick bond Spinner and Jay together, an impactful and important friendship moving forward. Remember in the first video about the next generation, I said that Spinner's relationships would define his story arcs in the seasons to come? Jay is an example of that. Anyway, Jay and Spinner then move on to bullying Toby, shoving him into a water fountain when he won't reveal where Rick is. When Jimmy sees this, he seems to have a crisis of conscience, and while he never becomes truly friendly with Rick, he does seem to call a truce at least. Once he's forced onto the Quiz Bowl team by Snake for his geometry and sports knowledge, the two spend some time together on the team. It's worth noting that we see Raditch's total failure to act early on in this episode. When Jimmy first joins the Whack Your Brain team, Rick goes to him for help. What he wants isn't very clear. Rick is less than transparent about the kind of bullying that Jimmy has been participating in. He mostly just says that Jimmy doesn't like him and makes it known, which, I mean, that could mean anything. Say he threw you into a dumpster, you know what I mean? And then what he wants to happen to Jimmy is also less than obvious. However, it's kind of pretty much Raditch's failure to really dig deeper into what is going on, making assumptions and refusing outright to do anything about it. Even without the deleted scene from a few episodes before when he refused to address the student body's concerns about Rick's returning to the school, the audience gets an idea of Raditch's position. The impression the viewers are left with is of a principal who is tired of dealing with a student who he believes is at least partly to blame for his own situation.
So are you asking me to order this student to like you? Do you really think that will resolve matters? Richard, I've told you time and time again, it takes two to tango.
Sir.
This is interesting because I think this is also how the viewers are meant to feel. We'll come back to this. Anyway, Rick seems pleased that he and Jimmy are finally getting along. There are a few bits in this episode that I really like. Rick calling Jimmy Jim is a callback to last season and continues to be a fun character thing. I like that it shows how out of step Rick is in social situations, calling someone by the wrong nickname and never seeming to realize how weird that is to everyone but him. Also, Rick's triumphant little salute here is fun, like he just can't help but gloat a little that Jimmy stood up for him, and probably my favorite Rick moment ever, this scene with Paige.
Raditch, line 1. Wants a suit back.
Take a message.
I've hung out with like a lot of nerds and weirdos who had to deal with some really mean comments from people all the time, and this is so familiar. I can't decide if it's smooth or not. The ease with which he brushes off this fairly mundane bit of cruelty could be due to his familiarity with it, which is, I think, what I saw a lot in high school, but he's obviously just also in a good mood here. It's amazing how a sense of belonging can change someone's outlook on their situation, an idea I think that is reinforced later in the other direction. At the Quiz Bowl, Rick is on top of the world. It's made clear over and over again that Rick really is the backbone of the team. In his mind, he and his friends are working together to win something for Degrassi. He says earlier in the episode that he and Jimmy will lead Degrassi to new heights of victory. This is about community for him. It's about belonging. If he wins this and makes Degrassi proud, he'll finally be a real part of the school. And it doesn't really matter that that's not how it works when he's up there winning. The whole school is watching, and it is clear that the kids in the audience are rooting for the team, if not specifically for Rick himself. Still, he is obviously doing well. He even ties the game. On the final question, which is about golf, Jimmy chokes, and Rick takes the answer instead. Jimmy says later that this is because golf isn't a real sport.
And anyways, golf is not a sport.
That's just a cute thing that, like, yeah, Jimmy would say that. The game goes to a tiebreaker round where one student from each school will answer questions in a head-to-head sudden death match. This is where Jay and Spinner hatch their plan. Using Jay's girlfriend Alex, who is co-student body president, they will set up a tar and feathering above the stage that they can release should Rick win. Which is exactly what happens. Just at Rick's moment of triumph, Presumably, and we're presuming because the direct aftermath isn't shown, Rick rushes off stage to go home. No adults follow him, more on that in a minute, but Emma does. She tries to comfort him, telling him that the people who did this look like jerks to the whole school, and Rick takes this opportunity to make his move. It doesn't go well. I don't want to say that Rick misread her signals so much as he fully imagined signals that just were not there. Emma is a Faraday cage. There are no signals getting in or out. For her part, Emma's reaction to his confession is openly disgusted. I don't think it would be wrong to suggest that her interest in Rick was on the same level that one might have for a puppy in one of those sad Sarah McLachlan ads. He was more like a project, something for her to work on and feel good about until some sad dolphin in the wild needed to be adopted.
No, I actually wanted to start a collection. To adopt a dolphin in the wild. Never mind.
Listen, maybe that's a little harsh on Emma, but I'm literally not saying anything that Emma didn't say in this scene.
I felt sorry for you. I pitied you. Get a clue.
Rejected in more ways than one, Rick returns home. Finding no one there, he sneaks into the study, pulls out an ornate box, and opens it to reveal a handgun. Not particularly gun safety savvy, Rick's parents. And here starts a truly incredible half hour of teen TV. In part 2, Rick returns to the school. The first person he runs into is Toby. Outside the school, Toby tells him that Raditch is on the warpath and Rick should go home for the day. The fact that Toby doesn't know that Rick already has been home is so spooky. Rick went home, but he didn't change, he didn't shower. He came right back with only one thing in mind. I always found it so frustrating that Toby was the one telling Rick that Raditch was going to punish the people who did it, that he should be going home. Why isn't an adult taking control in this situation? But that's actually much better than what happens in a deleted scene in which Rick does run into Raditch and the man does nothing. Tells Rick to go home. The end. That deleted scene also has Snake tearing into Raditch for his lack of action in this moment, but it also kind of calls Snake hypocrisy more into focus than in the final cut of the episode. After all, Archie has been spending all this time with this kid. He's the leader of the Quiz Bowl team and everything. So if he's so concerned, why didn't he take him aside? Why didn't he say something? Why don't we see Snake interacting with Rick? It highlights, I think, the complicated nature of the whole thing, how hard it is to see the right moves, even in hindsight. I don't know how to feel about the fact that they cut these scenes. I think they're really scathing, and they make the adults look pretty freaking useless. I don't know if that's good or bad, I don't know. In the final cut of the episode, instead of the scene with Raditch, we cut to a scene where Spinner confesses his role in the paint and feathers to Jimmy, who then threatens Spin with violence if he doesn't do something about it, presumably meaning come clean. Back at lunch, Rick encounters Paige in the cafeteria. Paige and Rick probably had the most contentious relationship of all the year before, but she approaches him anyway, saying that she thinks what was done to him was childish and awful. We can see what Rick is thinking about doing, but something about what Paige says de-escalates him. Instead of pulling out the gun, he apologizes to her for hurting Terry and returns his bag and the gun to his locker. I've seen criticism of this scene. I believe the claim is that the scene implies that we should be nice to abusers or people with anger problems in the hopes that they won't hurt us. Saying that, it's the responsibility of possible victims to be nice or something. But I don't think that's actually what the scene is saying. I don't think it was actually Paige's sympathy that affected him. I actually think it was the reminder that the last time he let his anger control him and hurt people, he regretted it. It makes you wonder if seeing Paige every day is a reminder of Terry every day. Even now, he's still living with the consequences of those actions. Perhaps that reminder that what he did to Terry was a choice was enough to change his mind. But the change doesn't last for long. In the bathroom, he's cleaning himself up. Presumably, he's going to go back to class when he hears people approaching, and he hides in the stall right before Jay and Spinner come in. Spinner is freaking out. Now that Jimmy is threatening him, he's sure that they're screwed, about to get caught for their prank. Observant Jay notices Rick's paint-splattered dress pants in the stall and comes up with a scheme.
Jimmy set the whole thing up perfectly. The way he got all those easy sports questions wrong.
Yeah, and made sure Psycho Boy was all alone in the final round.
Never would have happened without a man on the inside.
It's brutal and believable. Like, I can imagine someone falling for it. After all, Jimmy messed up the easy sports question, right? Why else would he have done that if he wasn't trying to set Rick up? I know I use this word a lot, but the rest of the episode is like literally iconic. Degrassi history. Everything about it, from the way it's filmed to the acting, is tense. The sound of the footsteps echoing through the hallway, the distant ringing of the late bell, the way Rick's hand shakes as he holds out the gun and closes his eyes. And then Rick shoots Jimmy.
What you say?
No, we're not doing that. We're taking this seriously. As students in the hall run away from the gunshot, again, the quiet in this scene is chilling, Rick wanders the halls in a daze until he finds Emma standing with Toby and Sean. He tells Emma that she made his list, presumably for leading him on. Sean attempts to talk him down.
We'll figure it all out, okay? Figure this all out.
But it is only when Rick reveals that he's already shot someone and raises the gun to Emma that Sean rushes forward, the two of them struggling for the firearm. And then... another gunshot. The entire school shooting sequence lasts, at most, about 5 minutes. The rest of the episode, about half its runtime, is devoted to the reactions from both the adults and the students. This is Degrassi at its best. I think one of the reasons that this episode is one of, if not the, most beloved of all the episodes is in part not just in their handling of the shooting itself, but in its aftermath. We get to see every relevant character's reaction, from Caitlin and Joey, whose relationship woes subplot is interrupted by the news, to Jay and Spinner, who argue over their responsibility in the shooting, to Hazel, who is told her boyfriend has been shot and is forced to stay in lockdown, uncertain of his fate. All of these scenes are pitch perfect, never over the top. Even moments that easily could have been too much, like Miss Kerwin seeing Jimmy being wheeled away on a stretcher, are just right.
Jimmy?
I also really enjoy Caitlin's takedown of a reporter on the scene who demands Caitlin share the story. I don't think it's hard to imagine what the writers thought about the way media reports on these kinds of tragedies. In the aftermath, some of the characters seek answers. Snake, for example, lays the blame at Radish's feet.
Of course. Now the groundbreaking 2020 hindsight policy kicks into gear.
While Ashley insists that the only reason anyone would do something like this is if they were, in her words, a psycho. It is Toby, however, who is given the most screen time and whose opinions fluctuate the most. First, when the police ask him about his friendship with Rick, he denies it. He even calls Rick a psycho himself. Later, when this sentiment is repeated by Ashley, though, he's obviously affected by it. Oh, somehow I also forgot to mention that Toby finds out about Rick's death through one of the reporters.
Did the gunman say anything before he died?
Died?
Another jab at the media, I think. But it's really just such a gut-wrenching way for Toby to find out, and so unceremonious. And explains a little bit his switch from denying being Rick's friend to maybe starting the grieving process. He finds his way to a vigil being held at Degrassi, which nicely summarizes the whole ordeal, I think, with this sign, which, as on the nose as it is a pretty good way to end the episode. The creators put a lot of work into this episode, and it shows. They've spoken before of writing the inciting incident as a balancing act, showing what might drive someone to this kind of extreme behavior without condoning it. 2 wrongs add up to 1 bigger wrong, said Brendan York, one of the writers for the episode. They even called a crisis manager who had been on scene after Columbine to help prevent them from telling what one writer called the Hollywood version of the story. They have also discussed their choice of Rick as the shooter. We never thought of creating another character, said writer Brendan York. Rick was chosen for his position opposite so many other characters, as demonstrated early in the season, and because they had faith in Ephraim Ellis, Rick's actor, to handle the difficult material. Faith, I think, that was rewarded, by the way. Not that all of the behind the scenes was smooth sailing. Somewhat famously, Aubrey Graham was not too happy with the idea of playing Jimmy in a wheelchair. At this point, he was already making mixtapes under his rap alias Drake, and according to Degrassi writers James Hurst, claimed claimed that his friends in the rap game thought playing a kid in a wheelchair made him look soft. In a recent 20th anniversary reunion, some of the other actors chimed in, saying that he struggled with being one of only 2 black characters in the show who was now also paralyzed. Understandable. Shane Kipple, who played Spinner, also implied that Drake may have had trouble with the idea of being an able-bodied actor playing a disabled character, which is also its own discussion. Of course, none of these have come from Drake's own mouth, so we have to take them all with a pinch of salt, but I thought they were worth mentioning since they were part of the conversation around the episode pretty recently. Backing up, the reaction at the time was overwhelmingly positive. The second part of the 2-parter is the highest rated on IMDb of the entire series, and the episode was recognized with a Directors Guild of Canada award. Ephraim Ellis says that he is still recognized on the street for his role in Degrassi, and he still frequently gets tweeted asking, "Why do you shoot my boy Drake?" As well as, of course, featuring in a hilarious scene in Drake's I'm Upset music video that served as a sort of de facto Degrassi reunion. Is the arc perfect? No. Nowadays, there is much more to be said about the radicalization of the people, mostly young white men, who do this sort of thing. If the episodes were remade, I would love a deeper dive into the connection between Rick's abuse of Terry and this action. And as even-handed as it was, I don't think that the bullying angle would work today. Though I am happy to find that many first-time viewers still find it effective. Still, despite its imperfections, it is impossible to ignore Time Stand Still's repercussions. When talking about media portraying school shootings, it is often brought up as exceptional, a true success that many will be unable to replicate. Outside of its place in popular culture, it was also groundbreaking for how it affected the show moving forward. The shakeup to the status quo was unlike anything that the show had ever attempted before, and so moving forward, things were going to be different. Sean. It was always going to be hard to follow up a 2-parter like Time Stands Still, but Back in Black does a commendable job. The episode deals with the aftermath of the shooting on the students' first day back. Cleverly, though, it tightens the scope quite a bit. While we do see the reactions of a few stray students, the majority of the episode is focused on the reactions of Emma and, most importantly, Sean Cameron. Sean is being heralded as a hero for his role during the incident, stepping in to save his friends. And he is taking it all in stride, or at least he's trying to. During group grief counseling, he rolls his eyes at any attempts to make him open up about feelings of fear or guilt that he might be experiencing, claiming that he doesn't feel bad about stopping a guy who was trying to kill people. However, that quickly unravels. Everyone around him wants him to open up. Snake, his girlfriend Ellie, and that annoying reporter lady Caitlin threatened to beat up the episode before. She shows Sean a clip of an interview she conducted with his parents back in Wasaga Beach, and he goes nuclear. He busts out of the news van, throws her monitor to the ground, storms out to Jay's car, and piles everyone in to head to Wasaga Beach to confront his folks. I love this episode. There are some great moments. His parents are really well cast, both of them doing an excellent job, and we get a lot of teen boy deals with angst by lashing out physically, a trope excellently executed by Daniel Clark. There are also some real misses, too. For some reason, they introduced Tyler, the kid that Sean deafened 4 years ago before he moved to Toronto, and we have this weird bit where their stories, and I quote, don't match.
Your stories don't really mesh.
Sean claims that Tyler and his friends jumped him, and Tyler claims that Sean sucker punched him in the ear. This is weird. One, because those stories aren't actually mutually exclusive. They can both be true, but even if they're not, why is Sean trying to whitewash it now? His taking responsibility for what happened with Tyler was a whole thing in season 1. He wasn't proud of what he did, but he was trying to get better, get a hold of his anger. Claiming now that it wasn't his fault, that it was all self-defense, kind of undermines the whole thing, whether it's true or not. It also puts the storyline with Rick into a weird parallel with the one with Tyler, which confuses it even more, since we know that Sean was acting in self-defense during that episode. Like, we saw it. Sean was acting to defend himself and his friends. Given the end of the episode, it might be trying to imply that Sean still harbors unaddressed guilt for what happened with Tyler, just like he does with Rick. But like, yeah, again, we covered this in season 1. We know he feels bad. Why is he trying to act now like he doesn't feel bad about what happened with Tyler? Whatever. They could have just left him out. Okay. But that's all right. This whole thing is somewhat made up for in my mind by this scene where Sean rides a wave runner dramatically. Depending on your taste for camp, this scene could be more of a positive or a negative. After having a 1,000-pound piece of equipment flip onto him, Sean almost drowns, but he is then saved, of course, by Tyler. The two share this nod of bro-ish respect. Seems like they've now buried the hatchet. All I wrote about this in my notes was, who wanted this? Who is this for? In the end, however, I still love the episode. While it seems at first like he came to Wasaga Beach to confront his parents for what they said about him to the reporter, which Sean interprets as playing the sad parent card, a card that he feels they don't deserve to play since they sent him away to Toronto, it ends up that Sean really just needed his mom and dad. Slowly, over the course of the episode, he lets down his walls to his friends. He confesses to Ellie how scary it was to face off against Rick.
When the gun went off, my hand was covered in warm liquid. I thought I pissed myself, but then I realized that I was drenched in Rick's blood.
And later apologizes to Emma for all of his actions in the year before. Only after all of this is he able to go and face his parents again, forgive them for sending him to Toronto, and confess his fears and guilt about maybe being responsible for killing Rick. I just want to take another moment while editing to re-emphasize how good Daniel Clark is here. The way he delivers these lines makes Sean seem so young. I just had to say something because literally editing this part of the video brought me to tears. That's how much this scene specifically affects me, and like just how good Daniel Clark is in this moment.
That kid at school. He was gonna shoot my friend. So I grabbed the gun. And it went off. I think I might have. Oh God! I might have killed him. I might have killed him. Died.
I really like this. I especially really like Sean forgiving his parents. Obviously, he holds some resentment that he had to leave and maybe feels rejected by them, but they say that was the right thing for you. And, you know, like he agrees even in the scene. And I think it was. I mean, we saw how mostly he did really well at Degrassi. And I think in that scene, I'm able to empathize with both Sean and his parents. So that's it for Sean Cameron, at least for now. At the end of the episode, he tells his friends and his girlfriend that he's going to be staying in Wasaga. I actually think it's really lovely that he's able to find a relationship again with his parents and start the healing. And even though I love Sean as a character, like I really love Sean, and I feel like the show is missing something without him, I also am really happy to see him get this moment. Ellie is not so pleased. Earlier in the season, her relationship with her own mom broke down entirely, and after her mom almost burned down the house one night after drinking, she moved in with Sean while her mom went to rehab. So now she's stuck with the rent. Emma. One of my biggest research goals ever since starting The Next Generation was getting my hands on some of those old journal entries that got posted on the characters' lockers on Degrassi.tv. These were posted in between episodes and sometimes even in between seasons, usually to give teasers for upcoming storylines, but they often also added some fun insight into the characters' heads. There is a little bit of debate in the fandom about how much of them are canon, but for the most part, where they don't contradict things that are actually happening on screen, most people take them as supplemental material. And since all of that content was locked behind a login and thus not archived by the Wayback Machine, a lot of that supplemental material has been hard to find, to put it mildly. Finally, though, I have managed to get my hands on some entries that were archived by some very diligent fans on their forum so that they could discuss them. Before the two-parter The Secret, for example, Emma posted this on her journal. My grades are dropping like rotting fruit, my friends are sick of each other, and I'm one of the three beauties in Liberty and JT's Dracula play with the school mega freaks, Amy and Alex of all people, and I feel more like I belong with them than anyone else. And ever since we drove Sean home to Wasaga, I can't stop thinking about our chauffeur. There. You can draw your own conclusions because I can't. If I've changed since our school became a crime scene, I don't know what from or what into. So, Emma is having a hard time. Understandably, given that she just had a gun pointed at her head by a guy she defended from the rest of the school. She's not herself. She has a lack of motivation. She doesn't speak up in class, doesn't want to hang around with her friends. Everyone around her either wants her to move on already or handles her like glass. The only one who doesn't is Jay Hogarth. It's no wonder then that Emma starts to spend more time with him. She sneaks out to the ravine, a hangout for Degrassi hoodlums, and spends some time with Jay, where she learns the significance of Amy's bracelets, those brightly colored cheap metal things that Amy seems to value quite a bit.
Those wire things are worth a nickel. It is. Who took them?
Emma discovers that they're traded to girls who earn them in a van parked at the ravine. These bracelets are, of course, based on the myth of the color-coded jelly sex bracelets, an urban legend that ran rampant when I was a teen. The story went that, playing a game called Snap, the girls would don these cheap, colorful plastic bracelets that were available. There was a time where you could get them at like the gas station. When playing the game, if a boy would break one of the bracelets off of her wrist, it would serve as a coupon that you could turn in for a particular sexual act. Which act varied by the color of the bracelet. For example, in an alarmist email forward documented by Snopes, yellow meant a hug, purple meant kissing, blue meant oral sex, etc. It was all bullshit, of course. These often are. Rumors about hacks to get girls to sleep with young men date all the way back to the 70s, and probably beyond, honestly, when the urban legend was that presenting a young lady with an intact soda or beer pull tab would make the girl say yes to having sex with you. Gross. And probably also never a thing that happened. Like, I'm sure no girl ever actually said yes to this. In the 90s, this evolved to the so-called shag bracelets. Similar to the jelly bands, these were made from the plastic rings of bottle caps and stretched to be worn around a girl's wrist. Again, these are just rumors whispered among adolescents who are still figuring this stuff out. Especially to younger teens, the mystery of how and when and who to have sex with is a very abstract question. And this kind of provides something of a solid, if somewhat fantastical answer. There is very little evidence, like none, that these sex coupons were actually used to get anyone laid. The 2003 jelly band craze was different from the sex coupons of the 70s and 90s in one major way. This time, the parents were hearing about it. Quickly, once adults caught wind of this rumor making its way into middle and high schools, the bracelets began to get banned. Anxious emails were forwarded from mom to mom, and then the media, like Tucker Carlson and Good Morning America, breathless with shock at the rampant teen sex, began to report on them. They talk about this and rainbow parties. Remember those when girls would supposedly all wear different shades of lipstick while giving oral sex and the boys would try and collect all of the colors? How would that even work? Anyway, those weren't real either. Anyway, the parents would see these programs, warn their kids away from such matters, and then the kids, often learning about this for the first time, would tell their friends, and the cycle would start all over again. If you're interested in the topic of moral panics around teen sexuality, I recommend the books Kids Gone Wild by Joel Best and Kathleen Bogle, and the urban legends and sexting episodes of the You're Wrong About podcast. Okay, hey, editing cat here. So since writing this script, a wonderful piece has been published on theringer.com called Moral Panics Come and Go, Sex Bracelet Hysteria is Forever by Claire McNear. And I'm going to link that in the description because it's an incredible read. It's so good. It features a lot of what I talked about here with something of a specific focus on the 2003 hysteria, which is the one that I find the most interesting. But I just thought it was worth mentioning because one argument that it seems to be making is one that I thought about as well, which was the role that Degrassi played in the canonization of the jelly sex bracelets, enshrining it in pop culture and giving it more cultural weight than it might otherwise have had. Of course, the piece goes on to mention that a number of other shows talk about it, specifically Law & Order SVU, where a character discusses the meanings of each color of the bracelets, which you could probably argue cements their meaning, because before this, the meanings would fluctuate quite a bit, but after this, they seem to be a little more rock solid, and I think that's because people reference the SVU episode when thinking about these colors. But like I said, I think the piece brings up an interesting point about the idea of these bracelets and sex together in the imagination of teenagers and parents. Even though Degrassi's was something of a combination of two different types of moral panic over teen sexuality, I do think it can be argued that it helped cement the idea in the public consciousness. Back in 2003, I had heard the rumors. We all had. As a little goth weirdo, I wore black and hot pink jelly bracelets at the time, which I interlaced into little patterns, and I remember people telling me in shock that black means sex. They told me this to warn me, as though I was somehow being risky for wearing them, but my response was the same as every girl I knew who wore these things. If anyone broke one of my bracelets, I was just gonna yell at them. I would feel no obligation to do anything sexual with them. Degrassi seems to have combined the idea of jelly bracelets and rainbow parties a bit for this storyline. In this, the bracelets are given as a badge of honor for a girl who performs, as we see with poor Amy, who seems to have her whole self-worth wrapped up in these things. The rest of the storyline is a pretty basic morality tale. After Emma has unprotected oral sex with Jay, she contracts gonorrhea, and so does Alex, and so does Amy. Alex quickly puts the pieces together about her best friend having the same STD as her and sleeping with her boyfriend, and dumps both of them. This is, unfortunately, the last time we'll see super trashy Amy. Rest in peace, Amy. You were so awesome, and I loved seeing your bad decisions. However, the thing I find the most compelling about Emma in this two-parter are her actions. Not just her sudden interest in Jay, which I do really like, but her impulsivity. Risk-taking is a common symptom of PTSD, which Emma is absolutely struggling with. I like the way it's portrayed. She's not the perfect little victim. At one point, using her parents' sympathy for her situation against them to get out of getting in trouble for sneaking out. I really like that it's a little scandalous that she manipulates them like this. The two-parter secret is closest to old school Degrassi in that it doesn't really resolve super well. It's a couple of storylines all in one, though they do mostly all end up tying back into Emma's PTSD.
Also, I just want to put on the record that I think Emma and Jay are a really interesting couple, and I think I just sometimes get kind of mad that they weren't a bigger story. Maybe it was too close to Sean. But I think Emma and Jay would have been a lot more interesting than where Emma's romance will go in the next couple of seasons.
There is a storyline in the next season that could also be tied back to this. It's related to Emma's desire for control, if you know what I'm talking about. But like Craig's grief in season 2 and his bipolar in this one, the connection is never made explicit. And speaking of Craig, I have alluded to and even directly referenced this storyline before. It's really hard not to, given how the story plays out. Contrary to popular belief, I've heard it stated a number of times, Craig wasn't written to have bipolar from the beginning. Jake Epstein has spoken before of when Linda Schuyler pulled him in to tell him that they were considering it for his character. However, Craig was always moody and extreme, so it is easy to watch the show in hindsight and go, oh, yeah, I see it. He was always written that way. As I've said before, I believe all of his erratic behavior in seasons 2 and 3 can be traced back to living with complex trauma after years of physical abuse and the grief of losing his dad. However, I see the appeal of putting it all under the bipolar label. Though bipolar is often diagnosed in young adults, it's not uncommon to see it beginning to manifest in teenagers. Occasionally, a traumatic event can trigger a deepening of depression or mania, and this may have been the case with Craig, who saw his best friend Jimmy shot. I have very little experience with this mental illness, so I can't speak to its portrayal on the show. In general, the feedback online seems to be that it's mildly over-dramatized, but overall resonates with those who have first or second-hand experience. As someone with none-hand experience, I still find these episodes difficult to watch. Over the course of season 4, Craig and Ashley have started to get close again. Early on in the season, when for his birthday, Craig is given money from his dad's estate, he and Ash go on a spending spree at the music store. Eventually, Ash starts showing up to their band practice, though the band never really gives her the thumbs up to officially join. Craig and Ash try to keep it friendly, but this proves too much for them to handle. In the words of William the Bloody,
"You're not friends. You'll never be friends. You'll fight, and you'll shag, and you'll hate each other till it makes you quiver, but you'll never be friends."
When it's time for Downtown Sasquatch to cash in on the studio time they won the year before, nice continuity, they struggle to decide what song they should play. Craig lands on Everything's Dust, since that is the song that won them the studio time in the first place, and at the same time, he and Ash get back together. This is something of a disaster for the band. They've adopted more of a reggae sound this season.
The night is never endless. The dawn is never soon. All around we hear whisper.
They switch genres often, and this is undoubtedly their worst. I hate this one. And Everything's Dust just doesn't fit with their new direction. But without Jimmy, Craig is more insistent than ever that they need a new person in the band, and Ash is that. Marco and Spinner revolt. I really hate this storyline, actually. Normally, I love it when teenagers make decisions in teen dramas that I find baffling or immature, because that's the point. If I wanted people who are supposed to be making mature decisions, I would ostensibly watch a show about adults. But for whatever reason, Marco and Spinner's behavior in this one irritates me. After they feel like they've been given second billing to Ash and Craig, they give Craig an ultimatum. No Ash on the recording. Either she goes or they go. Their rationale is that she lost the Battle of the Bands, so she shouldn't get any recording time. They're not saying that she's bringing the band down in any way. I mean, okay, listen, they do suck, but that is not the argument that they are making. They are upset that the band used to be about the group, and now Craig is making executive decisions for all of them. And so they come up with this bogus excuse that Ash lost, so she shouldn't be there. This is fine. It's even funny to me that they tell him to kick her out due to their group vote, or they will start making their own executive decisions, because if he can make choices, why can't they? When Craig can't kick Ash out of the band because of his feelings for her and his own previously established fear of confrontation and disappointing his loved ones, Spinner brings in Manny on tambourine, and Marco decides to play accordion. This is annoying but funny. They're not doing it to sabotage the group, they're doing it to put pressure on Craig so that he'll do what they voted on him doing. But Craig, of course, can't make a decision to save his life. Remember, this kid is conditioned to avoid conflict. His dad made it clear that his love was conditional on being the number one person in Craig's life. I don't think he knows how to tell someone he cares about that he's putting them second to anything. Finally, at the recording booth, Ashley, baffled at the circus the band has become, decides to back out of the recording when she realizes what's going on. A pretty cool moment from her, I think. In a great scene, she says,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be a diva, but are we really gonna record like this?
Well, what do you mean, Your Highness?
which is so funny. She's like, maybe I'm being too sensitive, but why do we have an accordion? Unfortunately, all of Marco and Spinner's pushing was a little too hard. Craig, whose guilt is amplified because he is literally singing a song he wrote as an apology to Ash, bails on the recording to chase after her instead. This is when they officially get back together. Ash moved that Craig chose her over something really important to him. The part that irritates me, and my wife will tell you that I get worked up about this every time, is the way Spinner and Marco respond to all of this. They stick around in the recording booth, and in the next episode, they play their two-man accordion version of the song for Craig at school. And then they blame Ashley for the band breaking up, as if she had anything to do with any of it.
Until you gave it all up for Miss Band Breaker-Upper.
Like, I'm sorry, but even if you don't think that Spinner and Marco's ultimatum of torpedoing the band if she wasn't kicked out is unreasonable, at the very least you have to admit that they only reaped what they sowed. They decided they'd rather have no band than one with Ashley, and that's exactly what they got. I really don't understand how that's her fault. Now, their anger at Craig is justified. No notes. But it's like, Ash realized what was going on and she left. You can't be mad at her. She didn't do anything. Whatever. Still, the accordion version of Everything's Dust seriously almost justifies the whole thing.
I don't know if you'll forgive me for being so blind to how
Is that what I think it is?
In the next two episodes, a two-parter called Voices Carry, Ash and Craig's new relationship is really put to the test. While Ash seems glad to be reassured that Craig is more committed than ever, it may be too much of a good thing. At the beginning of the episode, we see something that I really like. Ashley's mom being more than a little disapproving about her daughter spending so much time with Craig again. I didn't mention this in the last video, but in season 3, we got this fun Ferris Bueller style hooky episode with Ash, Spinner, and Paige as they attempted to bring Ash out of her sort of post-season 3 slump. Season 3 was a bad year for Ash, and her friends were trying to cheer her up. In that episode, we got a quick peek into the way her breakup with Craig blew up her whole life, and now in season 4,
before, Mrs. Kerwin is not too eager to watch that happen again. The main plot of this episode revolves around the wedding of Ashley's dad, who is marrying his long-term boyfriend. This was Degrassi's celebration of Ontario's legalization of gay marriage after a ruling in 2003, as well as being a fun callback to The Next Generation's first out gay character.
I'm so glad that gays can get married. That you two can get married. You gays. I mean, if you ever wanted to. Great.
Thanks for the support.
Craig's behavior surrounding the wedding is a bit odd. On first viewing, he probably just seems a little intense, but that's nothing new for Craig Manning. I think you could probably just chalk it up to a kid who has chosen his girl above everything else in his life, and now he's just a little too excited to commit to this new relationship. However, as the episode goes on, it becomes clear that something else is going on. Craig is slowly showing signs of mania. The first major red flags are his songs. He shows them to Ashley, telling her he's been staying up all night to write them. An abundance of energy and a lack of proper sleep is a staple of manic episodes. He shows a number of other signs as the episode goes on. Excessive talking, impulsive decisions like walking out of class and stealing Joey's credit card. Granted, all of that's normal for Craig, making it harder to spot. They have a number of big romantic scenes, and all of this culminates with Craig proposing to Ash, who says the only thing she can say to her boyfriend that she's been with for about a week.
Craig, I'm sorry, no.
No, Craig doesn't take it well. The second part of this episode is the one that's hard to watch. In some ways, it might actually be harder to watch than Time Stands Still Part 2. Having trashed the hotel room he stole Joey's credit card to book, Craig finds himself at a low point. However, after some prompting from her aunt, Ash calls to tell Craig that while she won't marry him anytime soon, she does love him and agrees to a long engagement. Craig is deep in a manic or hypomanic episode by now, and it escalates. He racks up debt by buying nice clothes on Joey's card, and he is off the walls. His erratic behavior prompts Jimmy to ask him if he's high.
Could you do this? Please? Are you drunk? Are you high, or are you just out of your mind?
Finally, moved by the events of the wedding, Craig announces to the entire reception his and Ashley's engagement, humiliating her and making a big scene when she tells him he needs to go. Ultimately, of course, Craig crashes. In bipolar disorder, episodes of mania are often followed by periods of depression, low energy, feelings of guilt and low self-worth, and even suicidal ideation. These crashes can last from weeks to months and are very dangerous to people with bipolar. Then follows the hardest scene of all. When he shows back up at his house, Joey tries to prevent Craig from leaving again. At this point, he knows something is wrong. In his desperation to help Craig, Joey gets physical to try and restrain him from leaving, and Craig responds with violence. I have no idea how hard it would be to be the parent of a child who is going through this. There is a moving scene earlier in the episode when Joey wonders out loud what exactly is going on.
Craig has problems. He's got a lot of problems.
No, Mom, he's not like this. Not ever. Joey, tell her.
What do I do? What is happening to my son?
And I am sure that there are times when it does get this bad. But I also think it's worth reminding viewers that people with mental illness, including bipolar, are more likely to be the victims of physical assault than the perpetrators of it. I say this because this seems to be the most highly criticized portion of the episode by people who have had firsthand experience with bipolar disorder, and the stigmatization of BD as a violent disease is why. However, the episode itself wraps up pretty nicely in the hospital. Craig has leveled out. He says he feels perfectly normal, which could be attributable to whatever medication they have him on, or it could be that he's just out of an episode, a thing that happens naturally for many people. He and Ash discuss his diagnosis. He says that he feels normal, not crazy, and Ash says he's not crazy, that bipolar is a chemical imbalance, but it can be managed. This is true, and I do think it's an important thing to emphasize. A disorder like bipolar 1 or 2 cannot be overcome with willpower or strength of mind. It requires medical intervention, either through medication, the help of a trained health professional, or a combination of both. Still, the perspective that he's not crazy, it's just chemicals in his brain, doesn't really touch on the reality of living with such a stigmatized mental illness. I mean, if Craig isn't crazy for having BD, then who is.
That is, at least in the case of how the wider public views mental illness.
Luckily, while this episode doesn't really touch on it, later episodes will. In a later B-plot, for example, Ellie suggests that Ash refer him to a support group for teens struggling with their mental health. This is actually Ellie's support group, which she goes to help her with her self-harm. When she shows up, Craig is embarrassed to realize that it was actually Ellie's idea that he come, worried about the stigma of his friends knowing that he's crazy.
Once people think you're crazy, I think they just think about that. They stop treating you like you're you.
But he and Ellie end up having a very lovely discussion about it that I'm very grateful for.
Well, that sucks.
It just is. It doesn't matter how I feel or how anyone else feels.
I'm bipolar. And apparently, it doesn't matter if I think that sucks either.
And of course, Ash's statement about "you're not crazy, it's just a chemical imbalance" is very in character for her. She's a great example of how even well-meaning people can contribute to the stigma. Over the rest of the season, Ash kind of morphs into his nurse, making sure he's taking his medication and treating him with kid gloves.
Why are you here doing this? Are you off your meds?
No, I'm not off my meds.
This just serves as a constant reminder to Craig that he's different, and it highlights the problem with the "you're not crazy, you just have a medical condition" mentality. And it really doesn't help Ash either. I mean, I don't approve of her treatment of him, like he's more her patient than her boyfriend, but I also have sympathy for her. She's a teenager with no real way of knowing the right way to handle this situation. I mean, she agreed to marry him just a few days before his diagnosis, and isn't the kind of person to leave a relationship just because it gets hard. But I mean, she's a kid, which is why at the end of the season, she decides she needs a break and flies to London. And that leads into the finale, a spectacular 2-part special worthy of being sold on its own as a special made-for-TV movie, which actually it turns out it was. However, before we cover that, I want to circle back to some of the storylines that deserve a little more attention. So this is where intermission would normally go, but I'm actually skipping the fashion and music corners this time. They're kind of a lot of work, and I'm pretty sure I'm the only one who enjoys them, so I figured that the time would actually be better spent getting this one up to you and edited as nicely and soon as possible. I don't know. Let me know if I'm off base with that. But yeah, let's loop back around and talk about some stuff. JT, Liberty, and Radishes. One of the most interesting things happening in the background of this season that I never even noticed until I was writing this video is the way the junior class's friendship is kind of falling apart. The junior students have always been pretty tight. JT, Emma, Manny, and Toby were the main characters of the very first episode of The Next Generation, of course, and their friendships have been sort of a constant for the last 3 seasons. However, with Manny and JT's breakup earlier in the season, things kind of start to crumble. I've mentioned before that Toby and JT's friendship is rocky early on in this season, with Toby sort of being replaced by Liberty's brother Danny, a new character in this season, and the senior kids. The group is thrown deeper into disarray when Emma distances herself from her friends after the shooting. There is one bit of consistency though. Liberty grows to be something of the heart of the group. In part, I think, because of her hot tub that is introduced this season. Manny and Liberty seem as tight as ever, and even JT is spending a lot of time at her place. Though whether that's for Danny, the hot tub, or even Liberty herself is somewhat up in the air for a bunch of the season. Their friendship at this stage is easy and comfortable. Liberty has moved on from her crush on JT, having dated Towers the summer before. JT has also grown. Having dated Manny, he is no longer interested in having a girlfriend for its own sake. The two grow closer still as they work on a school play. Specifically, they're supposed to be working on Dracula. Liberty has adapted it for the stage, and JT is set to direct. It's mentioned in his Degrassi.tv journals for the season that he was away at performing arts camp the past summer, motivating him. Here is as good a time as any to address the Radich in the room. During the pre-production process for the show, Radich comes to the teens and tells them that, in light of the shooting, Dracula is too dark of a show to put on. JT and Liberty insist that that's kind of the point, a dark story to allow kids to process and deal with the darkness at their school. But Radich is adamant. He suggests a musical about Degrassi and how great Degrassi is to raise the kids' spirits. Side note, I would love a Degrassi musical. Anyway, Given all his flubs, especially this season, it's not hard to see Radish's actions here as an extension of the way he has handled every problem at Degrassi, especially everything with Rick. Instead of listening to what the students really want, he tries to wallpaper over serious problems, putting on a bright and sunny face. This ultimately leads to his dismissal from Degrassi. This actually happens kind of randomly, just in the middle of an episode. There's kind of a mini ceremony, but no real build-up, and suddenly Mitz Hasalakos is the principal. I do want to say that while Radish sucked, he had been in the show since its very first iteration in Degrassi Junior High.
For those of you who are new, my name is Mr. Radish. For those of you who are returning, we meet again.
So I always find this moment kind of a bummer, especially going back and watching him in Degrassi Junior High, where he was an imperfect teacher whose heart was ultimately in the right place. It's really sad to see what happens to him as time goes on. Anyway, before he got fired, he had Liberty and JT audition their Degrassi musical for him, but instead of the propaganda he's looking for, Liberty ends up reciting a parody song they wrote the night before mocking him.
Radishes, radishes, not so sweet. Red and round, gross to eat. They have power, cruel little voices.
I run Degrassi, you have no choices.
They end up both getting in trouble, but JT is pretty much into it, and they end up kissing in detention. And that's JT and Liberty, y'all. They are sort of a classic, the class clown and the sort of goody two-shoes that had a crush on him the whole time. I know that there were people who were rooting for Liberty from the very beginning, and honestly, they are such a good match. It's really cute to see them bouncing off of each other. They stay tight for the entire season, using increasingly gross yet inventive pet names for each other.
Patience, my hot-headed paramour.
My talented namorata. Forgive me, Libby Tibby, my ickle nubby wubby pumpkin head, please.
Do I honestly strike you as a baby talk sort of woman?
We see a lot of them during the production of Dracula, which Miss Hatzalakos eventually does let them put on, and in an episode that tests JT's and Danny's friendship as Danny gets a little bit jealous that JT is spending so much time with his sister. Jimmy Brooks' storyline is somewhat unique in Degrassi. Not because he's Degrassi's first disabled character, or even Degrassi's first character who uses a wheelchair. That honor goes to Maya Goldberg in Original Recipe Degrassi. However, though Maya did feature in a number of episodes, she really wasn't a main character. I've joked before that characters on Degrassi that go to the hospital never return, from LD to Shane to Terry, but that spell is broken with Jimmy Brooks. It's clear that from the beginning, Degrassi writers were interested in exploring the story with him, and while I think they stumble a bit, I appreciate the effort. But they do stumble. Early on, the writers fall back on old tropes, telling the story in the background like they did with LD. Back then, I criticized the show for giving the point of view role to Lucy, mostly relegating LD to a plot device within her own story. This happens here too, but it's somewhat less egregious, mostly because Jimmy just keeps showing up. His friends will go to the hospital to chat with him about their own lives and their own storylines, and usually during these, we get a glimpse of what he's going through during these conversations. At first, Jimmy speaks about his paralysis like it's only temporary. He can't feel his legs right now, he says, but he confidently speaks about when he's able to walk again, or when everything gets back to normal, etc. But with each subsequent Craig or Marco visit, he's less and less sure. Ifs start to sneak into his speech. Uncertainty takes over. His prognosis is never revealed in a big showy way with a doctor in a white coat saying, "You will never walk again." But viewers get the idea. Eventually, Jimmy starts calling his legs useless and talking about learning how to adjust to his new life. The first Jimmy episode post the shooting is actually quite a lighthearted one and rather positive. In it, Jimmy is attempting to convince his dad to let him return home. This season is the first appearance of Mr. Brooks, by the way, a straight-laced, serious man with serious dreams for his kid. Jimmy's home life has been hinted at before, but we finally actually get to see more of it starting from here on. Mr. Brooks has been outfitting their home with accessibility features like ramps and rails for Jimmy, and that has slowed Jimmy's return to his own house. Being stuck in a hospital, even a rehab one for months, has been miserable. And so when his return date gets pushed back again because his dad has doubts about Jimmy's ability to take care of himself without assistance, Jimmy stages a breakout for the day. He wants to prove to his dad, and I think maybe himself, that he is capable of handling things. The result is, of course, Jimmy and his friends getting into some adventures. I adore this plot. High shenanigans as Marco and Craig spring Jimmy from the rehab center.
Sweet of you to bring this incredible disguise. I hate to tell you, but it does absolutely nothing to hide this enormous shiny mass of scrap metal that I'm sitting in.
I thought it'd be cool to look like ninjas.
This scene of Craig distracting the receptionist at the front desk is one of the funniest things that Degrassi ever did.
I'm here for Dr. Schinkle-Hatton.
I'm sorry?
I mean, Dr. Spitzelhaven.
Sir, I'm afraid we don't have anyone here by that name. HS Ryan Recovery Center. Good afternoon.
Dr. Spilkommission?
This is Dr. Spitz-Kaczynski here. It's an emergency of the highest degree.
Are you okay, sir?
Go get Dr. Schunkenhoser!
I could watch 10 whole minutes of Jake Epstein in a trench coat yelling fake doctor names at this woman. Ultimately, Jimmy's dad concedes, recognizing that Jimmy is a totally capable young man, and they agree that they'll hire a part-time nurse to give assistance should he need it. It's worth noting, I think, that Jimmy's experience here is filtered through his family's wealth. It's great that they can afford rehab and ramp installation and a part-time nurse and later a wheelchair accommodating vehicle, but this is far from the average experience when something like this happens. I don't really mind so much. I just wanted to mention that Degrassi isn't showing the most grounded version of this story. There is still a ways to go as far as disability representation on this show. That's not to say that I don't appreciate what they're doing, though. Jimmy returns to school not long after, where his story finally intersects with Spinner's. Manny, Paige, and Spinner, Part 2. Degrassi had something of a hard act to perform this season, and every season, really. It's all about maintaining a good balance between drama and levity. Often this is achieved through the more lighthearted B-plots and storylines of the junior class, whose issues tend to be less life-altering, although not always, as we saw with Manny last season. As the show goes on, the average age of the cast raises, and especially without junior high students to serve as a counterweight, Degrassi has to find new ways to bring the lighthearted fun. In this season, they opted for a longer, lower stakes, more teen drama focused storyline to tie in with this season's theme of continuity. And honestly, I'm not a big fan. It's hard to pinpoint exactly why. Logically, I should enjoy it. It features some of my favorite characters getting up to lighthearted high school antics. Both Manny and Paige are, on paper anyway, somewhat sympathetic and relatable. Add to that the stakes are pretty low, which I always like, and it should be one of my favorites. But I don't know. Maybe it's the writing or the acting or the direction, or maybe it's just that there's so much of it and it goes on so long and it sticks around long after it's worn out its welcome. Or maybe Pretty Little Liars scarred me, and I simply have no more patience for stories about taboo student-teacher relationships. I mean, I'm more than happy to blame Ezra Fitz for anything bad that happens in a teen drama, even in a different show that happened years before he sprang into being on the CW. Yeah, for those of you who watch this without knowing anything about Degrassi, and I know you're out there, this season features Paige Michaelchuk getting involved with a student teacher. I hate it! I hate Mr. O. You cannot make me call him Matt. I hate this stupid storyline. I hate the way the show kind of tries to justify it by comparing Paige and Mr. O to Marco and Dylan, who, by the way, are 2 years apart and went to high school together. But Paige and Mr. O, however, met in a classroom environment where he is in a position of power over her, have at least 3 years between them, if not more. Mr. O is likely on his last semester at a teaching college, which usually requires bachelor's classes to be taken first, so, he could be as many as 6 years older than her. Mr. O could lose not just his job, but his entire future career if he is caught with Paige, making the situation ripe for secrets, manipulation, and abuse. Marco and Dylan and Paige and Mr. O are not the same. Sorry. I think I'm just a little sensitive to these kinds of relationships being compared lately, for reasons. Anyway, Paige develops a crush on the new student teacher who shows up after the shooting and does the yoga. That develops into a flirtationship that then grows into something more as the episodes go on. Her behavior chasing after him is very bold and very Paige. This is the girl who went to the senior party just to spend time with Dean after all, so it does make sense that she would try and fake ID her way into a club just to sneak a peek at her crush. Still, going up to him and acting like she kind of belongs there was ballsy. Like, I mean, the man knows she's not legally allowed to drink. I do like the balls on Paige. But as her relationship with Mr. O grows, her other relationships suffer. Specifically, Paige struggles to keep up with schoolwork on top of her role as cheer captain and maintaining her secret relationship. I guess that's 1 point for Degrassi over Pretty Little Liars. Aria always had like 18 things going on, including sneaking around with her teacher boyfriend and running and hiding from whatever crazy stalker was sending her texts, but she still had time to take a pottery class somehow. Paige, at least, is dealing with time management problems. And when she does, it's Manny who picks up the slack. She takes over as kind of the acting cheer captain, choreographing more modern and cool cheers that Paige struggles with whenever she does show up to practice. Manny, by the way, is also doing this while performing in the school play and dating Spinner Mason, so she's killing it. Also, I forgot to put this in the script, but I think it's relevant that Manny's popularity with especially the cheer squad is in contrast to the way that she was treated very recently due to her situation with Craig. She was very much outcast for being sort of the school slut. And the fact that she has found a community and some consistency at school is actually a really big deal for her. And I think that just adds some necessary context to the conflict between these characters, which maybe is part of the reason Paige hates her. Manny kind of literally took over her whole spot and is doing it better. Hey, also a note, Manny doesn't date Spinner for much longer. Their relationship is pretty cute, but it is rather brief. Basically, after Jimmy returns to school, Spin is overwhelmed with guilt for his part in the shooting. Jimmy places a lot of the blame on himself, going so far as to say he deserved to be shot for how he treated Rick. Spinner can't handle that and comes clean about what he and Jay did in the bathroom. Sounds kind of weird out of context.
Phrasing?
When this comes out, it understandably destroys his friendships. No one wants anything to do with him. He and Manny unceremoniously break up. She just kind of ghosts him. Even Jay gets pissed after he confesses their role in the whole thing to Hatzilakos. Alex's part is mysteriously left out, even though she did play a crucial role as the student body president, allowing them to set up the whole prank. This is a plot hole that has sort of always bothered me. I don't know why it doesn't get addressed. Maybe it does and I've just always missed it. I don't know. It just feels weird. Still, I kind of like this Spinner moment. Even though he knows that he will be expelled, he decides to come clean. Say what you want about his motivations. Jimmy's claims that Spin just wants to relieve his own guilt by confessing just doesn't ring true to me. Spinner told Jimmy the truth because he needed to know the truth in order to accurately reflect on his role in the situation. Jimmy was set up. That is why Rick targeted him, not solely because of the prior bullying. Sorry, I might just be standing Spinner right now. I really can't be super objective when it comes to him. Even when Spinner attempts to light the school on fire, I'm just sitting here like, wow, that's an amazing response to being expelled. And even Jay is like, hey, whoa man, slow down.
Bruh, chill.
Eventually, Spinner convinces Hatzilakos to let him earn his spot back at Degrassi. He has no friends and no real support group, but he's still trying. And while all of this is happening, again, we have Paige and Manny. I wrote in my notes that even though for my research I rewatched this season in just a matter of days, by the end I genuinely forgot why these girls were fighting. And maybe that's part of the point. Sometimes high school rivalries are just like that. When you go back and forth for so long that you forget why you even hated her in the first place. But that's really not an especially fun place to be by the end of a season, when the antics have ramped up so much that they border on absurd. See, breaking each other's legs and undressing the other in front of the entire school, etc. See also Paige and Manny eventually getting into a fight that escalates to blows. When Mr. O helps to break it apart, Manny screams at Mr. O,
Hey, Mr. Pedophile! I mean, Oleander, don't make your girlfriend Paige even more jealous of me.
that he is a podiatrist in front of the whole school, and the secret is out. Mr. O tries to cover it up. He initially lies about the nature of his relationship with Paige, putting it all on her, but eventually comes clean. Great. I love it. I'm so glad you eventually decided to do the right thing. He loses his spot at the teaching college and really any other chance of a job at a teacher ever, since Ontario has an ethics requirement. And also, by the way, as of this year, 2022, Ontario also requires all teachers to take a course on sexual harassment, so that's good. Paige somehow still believes that they can make it work, although why, I have no idea. Mr. O saying that it's all Paige's fault is literally exactly the same thing that Dean did at the beginning of this season. Was that an intentional parallel and Paige just didn't see it? Or am I the only one that realizes this? I feel like I'm going crazy. Anyway, even though Paige somehow has hope for them, Mr. O bails, taking a job somewhere else for the summer, leaving Paige heartbroken and without a date for the dance. And like, Paige, there is no way you were taking him to the dance. Degrassi would not have let him take you to the dance. That would be cracked. At the dance, Paige has a super fun little pity party for herself, where she complains about how terrible all the Degrassi dances have been for her, which is true and very funny. Of course, Hazel whips around and lets her have it, saying, hi, I'm trying to show my boyfriend a good time here. Can you suck it the F up?
I wanted this to be special for him, and all you can do is whine.
If the tantrum's been thrown...
She was horrible to me. But can you tell me why you had to be more horrible back? Why you always have to be more horrible?
And just deal with it. This causes Paige to attempt to bury the hatchet with Manny, but when she sees that Manny is wearing the same dress as her to the formal, she completely loses it. This is when, of course, she rips off Manny's dress in front of everyone, and Manny falls into Kevin Smith's arms. And with that, I guess that leads us into... Kevin Smith and Jay and Silent Bob Go Canadian, eh? Let's talk about Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith is known for the movie Clerks, made in 1994.
Don't worry, we're not doing a book report this late into the video, even though I basically am unironically the stereotype of that video that's like basically every video essay. Part 1, early cinema.
I've mentioned Kevin Smith before on this channel. Actually, this is just one of those really great fun facts that Degrassi fans love to talk about. Kevin Smith loves Degrassi, and as was mentioned before, is known for putting Degrassi references in his work. The writers originally wanted him to show up on the premiere episode of The Next Generation back when it was just going to be a one-off special. It's rumored that he was going to be Caitlin's new fiance, but because the special was made on such a tight timescale, it had to fill a sudden opening in the network schedule. He ultimately couldn't make it as he was in the middle of making a Jay and Silent Bob movie. However, it is clear that both he and the creators wanted to see him on the show, so while it did take 4 years, they eventually made it happen. One thing that you commonly hear is that Kevin Smith wrote or directed 1 or all 3 episodes of Degrassi that he was in, and while that would be fun, it's not technically true. Kevin Smith is not credited on writing or directing any of the episodes. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly in 2019, he says that he pitched writing and directing an episode where Joey and Caitlin get married, but he was rejected. This is because of the grants Degrassi was receiving from Canadian filmmaking orgs, which stipulated a specific number of Canadian writers and directors for each season. However, Kevin did mention in that same interview working with writers, wink, when it came to creating his character for the show, who was something of a fictionalized version of himself. The Kevin who made Clerks and Jay and Silent Bob, but wasn't married. I imagine this wink means that he wrote a lot of his own lines, though to what extent he contributed to the storyline of the episodes is pretty unclear. The main takeaway here is I don't think you can explicitly blame Kevin Smith for what happens to Joey and Caitlin in these episodes. In this sort of 3-part special finale that in a lot of ways is more like a made-for-TV movie than anything else, Kevin Smith is scouting for locations for his new movie, Jay and Silent Bob Go Canadian, eh? He scores an interview with Caitlin Ryan, whom he recognizes from her old show Ryan's World, and she suggests Degrassi as a filming location. While touring the school, he sees a number of dramatic moments that inspire him to make the movie at Degrassi, but chief among them is Manny and Paige's catfight over the prom queen crown. When Manny falls directly into his arms, he delivers this incredible Kevin Smith line.
Ooh, you all right? We're gonna definitely be shooting here, Miss Ryan. Aren't you? Go put on a new gown. Dude, did you not see me 10 minutes ago? I flat out caught the prom queen. You know what kind of huge karmic debt that is to pay back? I gotta pay it forward, man.
Like any good Degrassi made-for-TV movie, the finale takes place mostly over the summer. Many of the students have been roped into working on the film, from Manny, Paige, and Ellie, who all have speaking roles, to Spinner Mason, who somehow has snagged some sort of production assistant gig. Biggest of all is Craig, who has been tasked by Kevin himself with the job of writing an original emo piece for the movie after Kevin heard him play this banger at the prom. Craig is thrilled. He is psyched to be spending the summer working with Ashley on music together, but Ash is torn. As I mentioned before, she's supposed to be jet-setting over to London with her dad, interning at, I think, the BBC or Channel 4, one of those British news ones. It's a pretty sweet gig, and one that will allow her to spend time in another country and with her dad, and also, importantly, away from Craig. At first, Craig doesn't really get that that's what's happening, and he attempts to follow her to London. He has to work really hard to do this. Joey is initially hesitant about letting Craig go to another country so soon after his diagnosis, but Caitlin and Craig work to convince him, and eventually Craig is able to get permission and tells Ash he's coming along too. But she puts her foot down. No, Craig. She needs a break. From him, from the pills, from worrying if he's manic.
I love you. But ever since my dad's wedding, it's just been me worrying. Me watching for signs, watching what I say.
Brutal. Instead of telling anyone that he was turned away, Craig instead decides to hide. I guess he's gonna pretend that he was in London for the entire summer. He lives in the boiler room at Degrassi. He's not taking his meds. He's manic, working endlessly on a song for Kevin. Eventually, when they spot him, Kevin and everyone, including Spinner, are surprised to see him there. Caught and feeling trapped, Craig eventually bails, finally doing what he has been threatening to do since his introduction in season 2, and runs away. Just him and his guitar. While all of this is going on, Caitlin and Kevin are spending more time together. Things between Joey and Caitlin have been hard for a while. I haven't talked a lot about it because it's mostly just normal stuff. Caitlin has been trying to make the domestic thing work with Joey, even going so far as to buy his house for him when his business was having a rough time. But her methods cause problems, such as buying the house for him without even talking to him about it first. And it looks like they might be on the verge of a breakup right before the school shooting. That kind of grinds everything to a halt, and I think brings them together in a way. But there are still rifts in their relationship. Now, she and Kevin are growing closer. She's also frustrated with her job. With Ryan's World and her series on AIDS the year before, she felt like she was making a difference. But all this season, we've seen her struggle against the yoke of local news. For example, in an earlier episode, she wasn't able to broadcast Marco's protest of the homophobic policies that disallow men who have sex with men, or MSM, to donate blood. At the time of the episode, any MSM who had had sex with a man within the last year were not eligible to donate. Now, in both the US and Canada, that time has been lowered to 3 months, which is I guess technically better, but still deeply misguided and stigmatizing. In September of 2022, Canada will be moving to a more behavior-based approach. Anyway, Caitlin feels as though she can't make a difference at her current job, and Kevin Smith, trying to be helpful, hooks her up with a Ryan's World reboot in LA. Caitlin is torn. She doesn't want to lose Joey and her family, but they're constantly fighting, and she feels like no one at her current station values her. When her boss basically confirms this, she decides to take it out on her liver. In a less than sober moment, she kisses Kevin Smith, panics, and then goes home and proposes to Joey Jeremiah. This is, I think, not exactly how the Caitlin-Joey shippers would have wanted this to go. It's not really how Kevin wanted it to go either. When Spike tells him about Caitlin's new engagement, well look, there's no other way to say this, he throws a tantrum, and he treats Caitlin pretty badly. I mean, I get that his fifis are hurt, but the way he berates her as a director when she's struggling through a scene he put her in is like Joss Whedon vibes. It's bad, y'all. I don't like it. He does have a redemptive moment, though. Later, when Caitlin and Joey are doing anything they can to try and find Craig, Smith uses his pull as big Hollywood guy to put out what is essentially an Amber Alert on Craig, who is immediately spotted in a soup kitchen. Craig has had it bad. He teamed up with this young guy, Skinny, to busk on the street.
Calls themselves that anyways.
Calls himself Snake. Or Wheels.
Skinny also seems to be houseless and eventually robs Craig for his money and guitar. Craig is in bad shape. Even after they find him, it takes him some time to recover.
Joey, my guitar. What did I do with my guitar? Just help me find it, please.
Meanwhile, Joey wants to do all that he can to find and turn Skinny into the cops, but Caitlin protests. "We don't know this kid's situation," she says. "He could be another lost Craig." A fair point, I think, actually, but Joey isn't really thinking with social justice brain. He's thinking with dad brain, and dad brain says, "That guy hurt my kid," so he's not really in the mood to hear it. This fight, the final fight between Caitlin and Joey, ends with her deciding to take the job in LA. In a later scene, as Kevin wraps up filming at Degrassi, she thanks him for the opportunity, and Joey, crushed at losing Caitlin, finally breaks down.
We're supposed to talk, remember? It goes both ways.
I don't want her to go.
I know.
And that's Joey and Caitlin. This is such a sad way for this classic Degrassi ship to go out. Pat's acting in this final scene breaks my heart, and it kind of pisses me off, not just that the relationship ended and it ended like this, but also specifically that Caitlin doesn't even end up with Kevin Smith. I don't know. I just kind of feel like if you're not going to be with Joey Jeremiah, then Kevin Smith is a pretty good second. And she doesn't, even go for it. Okay, fine, I get it. It's a feminist ending. She's a feminist. She doesn't need a man. She left him for a good job and because they were unhappy. And it doesn't have to be for another relationship. And I respect it. Whatever. Sorry, man. I love Joey and I love Kevin. And she blew it. She blew it so hard. Caitlin will appear in Degrassi again, but only a few more times, and only once more in any capacity that I think is worth mentioning, which is a storyline that makes me so angry that I can't even think about it without seeing red. Those who have seen the Ellie College storylines might have a clue what I'm so pissed about. Actually, as far as reappearing, a lot of these characters do. So will Kevin Smith, Jason Mewes, and Joey Jeremiah. But that's all next season. Lightning round. Okay, it's going to be the quickest of lightning rounds here because there are a few things that just don't fit anywhere else that deserve not to be left out. So let's go. New characters. I've mentioned Darcy as a new character that was introduced this season, and she's great. But further new characters, of course, include Liberty's brother Danny and Shantae, a cheerleader and friend of Darcy, whom I'm mentioning now so you can try and keep track of exactly how many seasons she's in. Spoilers, it's a lot. Marco and Dylan. I feel like overall Marco actually has a really good season. He is co-student body president with Alex, and he ends up joining an organization to help make a difference with AIDS overseas, which is very cool. He also comes out to his mom this season, which goes pretty okay. Dylan struggles with Marco's closeted status, and by the end of the season, he is suggesting that they open up their relationship and become non-exclusive. Eventually, Marco learns that while Dylan is suggesting they do this in the future, Dylan actually already has done that, and in an attempt to make Dylan jealous, ends up kissing Craig at a party. This is just a great thing that happens.
So when in doubt, you kiss Craig?
I gotta settle this with Dylan. Huh?
Yeah, you do. You really, really do.
Of course, after Marco learns that Dylan has cheated on him, they split, which is good. That's also good. Marco, you deserve better than that. Alex. So everything that happens with Alex is something that I've brought up before, but I just kind of want to lay it out here. Alex was introduced last season as Jay's girlfriend, which is cool. It's this season where they fleshed out her character quite a bit more. She became co-student body president. Initially, she threatens to out Marco in front of the entire school, which is one of the reasons that he ends up coming out to his mom. But she ends up being unable to go through with it. This is sort of the beginning of what you might call a redemption arc, or at least an arc towards humanizing her a little bit more for the audience. As I mentioned before, we learn about her personal relationship with domestic violence as she's seen with her mom's boyfriends. She sort of begrudgingly befriends Paige, and in a lot of moments sort of acts as a voice of wisdom for her, which is really cool. And of course, she breaks up with Jay after she finds out that he's been cheating on her. This is probably going to serve as the biggest character development for Alex as she moves away from that social group and towards one that's closer to Paige and Ellie and Marco. Heather Sinclair. Somehow, I haven't yet mentioned Heather Sinclair, an unseen character in the vein of Columbo's wife, Erica from BoJack, or Diane from the original run of Twin Peaks. She's something of a running gag in the series, with other characters referencing her ridiculous behavior, her clothing, her nose job, her affinity for Celtic dance, and more. She played a major role in the events of season 4, at least as much as a character who never speaks or shows her face can. She was number 2 on Rick's list of hottest girls at the school. Amazing. And contracted mono just before the Whack Your Brain competition, which led to Jimmy's recruitment to the team.
Okay, well, we got geography and sports covered. Rick, meet your new teammate.
What?
Heather Sinclair just came down with mono. Her loss is Jimmy's gain. Welcome to Whack Your Brain.
Just think, if Heather hadn't gotten the kissing disease, Jimmy probably wouldn't even have been paralyzed. The closest the audience ever gets to seeing her is this season in Neutron Dance during yoga. Heather Sinclair is a vital part of the canon, and I just couldn't let this season pass without pointing her out. Conclusion. The term jumping the shark... Yeah, that's right. We didn't do a dictionary definition at the beginning of this essay, so we're going to do it at the end. The term jumping the shark originated with the 1977 episode of the long-running popular nostalgia bait TV show Happy Days, in which Fonzie, notable cool guy, literally jumps a literal shark while water skiing in his iconic black leather jacket. The phrase is commonly employed when discussing a show that has performed a stunt to chase popularity or publicity, which then marks a decline in quality for the series from this point on. I find the origin of this term interesting because it highlights just how nebulous and weird the phrase is. While in common use, it's often thrown around to mean the final crumbling of the last of a show's dignity, or the moment that most people knew the show was going downhill, this is actually far from the case with Happy Days. That show would continue for 7 seasons after that moment, and while the show had its critics at the time, few recognized the jumping of the shark for the important moment that we would label it to be years later. Of course, in hindsight, it's easy to see why this moment should be the one that is so infamous it created its own phrase. As TV Tropes argues, it was the beginning of the Flanderization of the Fonz, his creation into a 2D caricature rather than a truly fleshed out, interesting character. This moment also went against established character development, namely that Fonzie had already learned a lesson about doing stupid stunts to prove how brave and cool he was. Jumping the shark walked back the lesson he supposedly learned, only to reward him with getting to be the cool guy who jumped the shark with no repercussions. Of course, anyone with any stake in the character would be disappointed by this. But as this obviously super scientific graph shows, much of this analysis is being done in hindsight, and it's often hard to see a slip in show quality when it's happening. I've said before that every Degrassi fan has a moment that they can point to and say, this is the point it all started going downhill, and very few have points that overlap. Which seasons we like are often dictated by which characters and storylines we connect to, as well as which we watched when we were younger, and that will be about as varied as there are characters and storylines to witness. I don't think it's particularly helpful to talk about the downfall of Degrassi as if it's something objective we can pinpoint. Even now, with years of hindsight, it's a difficult thing for me to think about. But I could see the argument for the jumping the shark moment being many things from this season. The school shooting, the teen proposals, Kevin Smith catching the prom queen. If one considers a slow and steady decline necessary for a shark jump, then especially considering what comes next, whether we know it or not, we may have just seen one. But that's next time. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing. Also, make sure to do that and maybe ring the bell if you want to get the next video delivered in a timely fashion. I get a lot of comments about folks not seeing these videos when they first come up, so getting notifications should help with that problem. I don't upload a lot of videos, so I promise it won't be clogging your notifications. Thanks especially to my patrons, whose names you see on screen right now. I want to give a special shout out to Amanda Johnson, Cassandra Barker, Isabella Petroni, Mary Danielson, Smith & C, and Verlangen Lottie Comics. Thank you all so much. This episode was hard to write, I said before. It was hard even before there was a whole clump of mass shootings. FD Signifier said something in a recent video also referencing these current events that really resonated with me while I was writing the script. It's not easy to have a philosophical discussion about an ongoing current crisis. And of course my videos aren't really philosophical, but I do like to think that I touch on things that are important. and I wanted to make sure that I was respectful. A number of poorly timed things happened over the course of researching and writing this video. The Amber Heard trial was another difficult thing happening in the public sphere, and I found it really hard not to let that color my view of Paige's trial within the show. Obviously, I also struggled with how to talk about Rick, who I believe was written very empathetically. This is something I've always liked about the season, but I've soured on this angle in recent years, given what we've learned about how these kinds of boys are radicalized. It was hard to talk about what the powers that be were trying to say on its own terms, rather than sort of how I felt about the storyline. I hope I did it justice without glorifying the bullied school shooter narrative, which I don't really buy anymore. Due to the nature of the next few seasons, I actually think the next few videos should be faster paced. I should be able to squeeze more in there, so they should also come quicker. Thank you all so much for your continued support. Stay safe out there, and I hope you have a great day.